Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another show. I am back to cover some more Dawkins. I think it's been a month since I have last covered anything from good old Darth. Took a little bit of a vacation from him. Uh, con- Content has built up, so it's time. Let's see here. So this one is from I think 3 weeks ago, 2 days ago. The Haksaw conversation. Um, and actually, he dropped a more offensive one about the whole Matt Dillahunty, Andrew Wilson kerfuffle thing. But I mean, most of his reactions to that are pretty standard. Although I might cover that a little bit too. Let's see here. Let me add this in here. So there, for this one, I don't really have any context for this one. It's just a conversation that he had with this guy named Hacksaw on over on Discord. Um, Kind of starts out with some of his more classic questions. He already sounds bored and irritated, and I think he sets like a new record for himself. It might be the fastest he kind of like um, maneuvers a person into, you know, a kind of a red herring of an interrogation. So um, this one's not like he's not really breaking new ground here, but you know, it should be interesting to kind of cover some of this. Good to see you, Jail Warren. Let's see. I'm not going to try to go through everybody. I have a lot of people lined up. I'm just going to say hello to everybody in the chat rather than try to highlight all of you. For whatever reason, I kind of wish that you could kind of highlight, quickly different comments. This particular software, you can't. Um, and it goes through its little graphic display. And I know there's a way to change it, but all of them are kind of slow. Anyway, let's see, Jefferson. Better check your notification settings. 30 minutes ago, it came up with a start time at 22 hours. That's kind of odd. It shouldn't be. Let me. No, scheduled 9th of November, 6 p.m. I'm not exactly sure why that notification was doing that. That's kind of weird. I don't think that I did notice that on here either. Oh well. Manny Perez says, your general acknowledgement is acknowledged. Thank you, Manny. Jay mentions, my notification was correct. Okay, so it's probably YouTube just being weird again. Sometimes its notifications are on the blank. I've heard of that happen. It's actually happened to me before. Somebody's had it right, and I get one that's saying it sounds like it's going to be like a day, a day or two from when they're actually going to air. Okay, so with that being said, this conversation just starts off. This is just Darth dealing with us. Tom has kind of edited this one together because, like I said, with the content warning in the description, Darth yells "stop" at this guy quite a bit. We'll kick him and then bring him back in, which has become his kind of thing, like catch and release. He's just yo-yoing these people into these conversations. So we'll get this one started. Like I said, nothing too big, but it does kind of encapsulate quite a bit of Darth Dawkins' general cringe level. So we'll see what we can do here. Let me shrink myself down here and we'll get going. Like usual, if volume and things like that are not working, yell at me in the chat.
Hello?
Hello, are you an atheist?
Yes, I am.
Good. Tell me why.
It just seems to me that there's no compelling reason to believe in a god of any sorts, and that also, wait, are you defending that there is any specific god, or that there is no god that there is a god in general?
Well, my position is that the Christian God necessarily exists and he has revealed himself in a rationally undeniable way. Now,
Rationally undeniable how? I mean that he's mentioned this before. I don't know how if he's actually ever um, done anything to really illustrate what that means by rationally undeniable, other than to say, well, you can't deny God because of the impossibility of the contrary, or some nonsense presuppositional claim. But saying something is rationally undeniable is a bit steep. And also, just because it would be rationally undeniable, I don't know if that necessarily equals that it would be true. Just because it's rational doesn't mean that it's true or accurate.
It doesn't follow, and that what you're giving are the typical atheist responses that are non sequiturs. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. In a possible world where
So he's already suggested that this guy, Haksaw, has given him a non sequitur. He asked him if he was an atheist. Haksaw said yes. Then he asked him, then he said, good, tell me why. He didn't ask for how it's whether or not God is impossible. This is classic Darth, screwing this up every single time. If you ask somebody why they're an atheist, they can give any reason that they really want. Like, I don't like God. I think the idea is poopy. I mean, they can get into anything that they want at that point. You're just basically asking them, well, okay, what's your psychological disposition? You claim you're an atheist. Why are you one? Well, now generally being an atheist, would be, I think, already contains within it the notion that somebody lacks conviction of the reality of a higher power, generally speaking. But if you're getting into the conversation with Darth Dawkins with some of the baggage that he's got in it, he's like, okay, tell me why you're an atheist. The only reason for Darth that you could be an atheist is if that you've done an exploration and determined that there can't be a God. And as it turns out, Darth actually presents the kind of God that's the easiest one to shut down. What Darth usually likes to do in this conversation, he's going to get into this with this one. And I will let him finish this question, and then we'll go from there.
God might exist, could he create,
Let's go.
in a possible world where God might exist, could he create the world with creatures like ourselves wherein he did not disclose his existence?
The correct answer to this question is, because it's a trick question from Darth, the correct answer is no. Because there isn't a possible world where God might exist. There's only one world where God must exist. And that God must be a disembodied mind which contains all the great making, in parentheses, omni properties. And some of those attributes associated with that entail that God is necessarily self revealing. And, as Darth put it earlier, rationally undeniable. Therefore, no. That's not possible if we're taking God and the definition of God that Darth means, that it could do like this, just if it's built that way. No, I don't think that it could. The other correct answer to this is yes, it could, because the impossible definition that they're talking about, the disembodied mind with all these great making properties, is capable of doing everything and nothing at the same time, because it's a walking contradiction or floating contradiction. I doubt it needs legs, but and you still get nowhere. Right? He doesn't want that particular God to be on the table, right? His God needs to be rationally undeniable. If you can just write it off as being contrary, contradictory, philosophically or metaphysically catastrophic or explosive, however you want to phrase that, basically you take all these properties together, you add them up, you start getting so many conflicting things, it just goes poof. So really, there's no great way to answer this question. Is it possible? Is it possible that there's a world where there is a God, however we choose to define a God, and in that world, that God might exist, and he could create people that he doesn't disclose his identity to. Now, what's interesting about this idea coming from Darth is that this is not only is it dishonest in the two previous ways I demonstrated. The first one being Darth's definition of God is one thing, a disembodied mind with all the great making properties. This second aspect to it here, where he's like, could there be a world where a God exists, might exist, where he creates people? The world that exists has to come from the God that Darth is talking about. That's part of his definition of God. So as soon as he lays out this particular thought experiment, the God that we're talking about is not the God that Darth normally defines as God. He's engaging in what he calls a worldview body double.
I would say that You could theoretically say that that is possible, but I don't think that would relate
No,
if you extend that across. Because
focus. Listen carefully. If I said to you, in a world where God might exist, could he make it so that some people could jump 10 feet tall like myself?
in a world,
I mean, yeah, but well, here's the thing. If you believe in a God with all those great making properties, and maybe God has created worlds where people on average jump that high. I mean, let's not limit God to just one universe. He is omnipotent. He's got all those great making properties. Thank you, Spooky, for mentioning that. 6 thumbs up more than I deserve. You might be right.
How
where
would
he
you answer
does
that?
exist, he could say that he could do that. Yeah.
Okay, now, in a world where God might exist, could he make it so that he doesn't, could he purpose not to reveal himself? Could God do that if he existed?
In this, see, this is interesting because in this world, he hasn't actually said this is a world that God created, a world that is necessarily dependent upon God. This is just a useless thought experiment coming from Darth, because if you try to play in this little sandbox that he's trying to construct here, all he's going to do is just kick dirt in your face, because anything that colors outside the line, he'll just end up retreating back to his definition of God, which is a God that can really do anything except for the things Darth doesn't want it to be capable of doing. Where it contradicts itself, or it appears bad. Any of the stuff that would make him look like he's got less of a case to make.
Yeah, of course he could do that, but that doesn't
Okay,
make it
stop,
any reason
stop,
for me to.
stop, stop, stop. Now, what you have just agreed to has destroyed your own position, and you don't even realize what just took happen.
What just happened? What just took place, or what just took happened? Okay. So yeah, Darth's chewing up his words. So he asks Haksaw to engage in a thought experiment. Haksaw does, and now that Haksaw has, for the purpose of the thought experiment, said, "Yeah, I suppose that in that world a god could do that." Now Darth's like, "Aha! Then you've conceded there's a chance he could exist." No, he hasn't. He really has. Is it possible that there is a possible world where a god might exist, and in that world where that god might exist, it creates people, and when it creates those people, it doesn't reveal itself to people? Okay, let's play along and say that what happens if you say, "Sure, I think that might be possible," and Darth's like, "Aha, so you do hold out that there's a possibility that God could exist." Yeah, a god dependent on a universe that already exists around it. I don't believe in the non-contingent eternal being that you're talking about. The God that you talked about, there is a world, and in this world there is a God, and that God then creates people. So this is just goofed up. Now he's going to try to say, "Aha, here." So the whole point of this is basically to try to tell Hacksaw, well, your problem is, as an atheist, is that I asked you why you're an atheist, and you told me it's because you don't think that there is a God. And I'm going to tell you that what you're trying to say to me and anyone else that asks you about your atheism is that because you think God's not real, it follows that he must not be. And that's not what most atheists believe. At least, hopefully, they don't.
Because you see, all of the reasons for God might fail from your perspective, but it still might be the case that God exists. All you're just simply saying is, well, because I'm not convinced, therefore God doesn't exist.
See, that's what he did. Jay, yeah, exactly. How would it be possible for God to not reveal itself if its creation reveals that God? Aha, but that's the issue, though, right? The thought experiment is like, let's say that there's a possible world where God might exist. And in that world, but he doesn't say anything about whether or not that world is dependent upon God's creation. The only thing he hinges on creation is people. God creates people. So, I mean, maybe I'm not being charitable at all here with him, because I think somebody needs to hold his feet to the fire about being this sloppy with any of these thought experiments. What I think he's trying to say is there is a world that a God world, and in that God world. So, okay, what does that mean? What kind of God are we talking about? Are we talking about the kind of God that creates everything upon which all things fundamentally depend and derive? And the revelation of such is undeniable proof of that God's existence, then it's not possible for that God to exist, or for that God to not reveal itself. It's a factor of it's by definition part of itself. If he's trying to say that this God is just one that happens to exist in the world and it only creates people, or it creates people in some other things, and it just keeps itself hidden, is that possible? It's possible, depending on what your definition of a God is. Depending on the definition of God that Darth constantly provides and hammers people with, this is not possible. So yeah.
That's a non sequitur. Do you know what a non sequitur is? Do you know what a non sequitur is?
Darth is already getting like unnecessarily like agitated, which is weird, because he's only been talking to this guy for 2.5 minutes, if that. Actually, no, it's probably only been 2 minutes. P-Town says, it's obvious he just left you to your reprobate mind, as you like to say in your heart. There is no God. You are without excuse. It's so obvious. It's obvious that we are without I always love it when Christians bring this up about the reprobate mind. What does that mean, P-Town? Reprobate mind. And is that my fault or God's? Because if you ask, I don't know if P-Town's a Calvinist, but if you ask a Calvinist, that's not my fault. I'm a vessel designed for destruction. I mean, you may be able to say, oh, it's just your reprobate mind. Okay. Well, then leave me to my reprobate mind then. If you're a Calvinist, there's no hope. And bear in mind, theologically, for Calvinists, it's one thing to be intrinsically sinful. All men are. Reprobate is given over to sin. You are without salvation. You are not it's the opposite of being elect. I don't think that enough people put enough mustard on that thing when they talk about reprobate. Reprobate doesn't mean that you're just a degenerate. It's not synonymous with sinner. It's a destined, guaranteed, blue ribbon, AAA certified, destined for hell, all gas, no brakes, full tilt, sinner. That's what a reprobate is. Destined for hell, built for it by God. Purpose built for hell. Purpose built for damnation. It is a weird theological point. And it always kind of blows up the whole like, well, Jesus died for all. He can't. Because if there's a possibility of the existence of these kinds of people, reprobates such as Jay, or possibly me, or others in this live chat, then Jesus not only did not die for everyone, he couldn't die for everyone. Because those destined for hell cannot be saved, will not be saved. God has already ordained it. So you're going to have to retcon some things.
So do you mean like that it doesn't... I don't think that is. It's not, though.
Okay, listen. How old are you?
22.
Good. Then act like a 22-year-old man and not a 14-year-old. I asked you a direct question. Do you know what a non sequitur is?
Yes.
Good. I just explained to you painstakingly how you committed a non sequitur. It doesn't follow because you are unconvinced.
Wait, may I ask you a question?
Therefore, no, you can wait on that question.
Okay.
Your position is God as an ontological reality does not exist because you're unconvinced. How does that logically and necessarily follow?
It doesn't. But I'm kind of wondering what Haksaw answers here.
Is there a world where Bigfoot could exist? Could God have created
Okay, listen to me.
I think I know where Haksaw is going to go with that, but that's not gonna work for Gary.
If you're 22 years old, I expect you to reason like a 22-year-old man, not a 14-year-old. Now, I asked you a question. If you die, okay, goodbye, you're done. 22 years old, going on 13. Okay, we're done. I'm not having patience with this adolescent.
Less than 4 minutes talking to that guy, and he muted him. Unbelievable
behavior. 22 years old, and he's.
Why does Darth act like an 8-year-old? He doesn't know. We'd have to ask his mom. God rest her.
Acting like a 14-year-old. You see, when we try to point out, oh, God doesn't exist because I'm unconvinced. How does that follow?
Well, actually, that's the problem that Darth has. It does follow from certain arguments, and those arguments have been made to him, and he just like flies off in a rage. If a necessary attribute of God is that He's self-revealing, then He doesn't exist. If He hasn't been revealed to me, if He hasn't been revealed to you, if He hasn't been revealed to anyone, some people, even just one person, He's necessarily self-revelatory, which means everybody should know that he is. Usually, what will end up happening is that all of a sudden that self-revelatory thing will then take on this thing of like what they want self-revelatory to mean is that you deep down know there's a God and you know it's my God. You're not gonna try and shuck and jive here around the whole like maybe it's Allah, maybe it's no, we're in America and American God is Jesus. So you're gonna give it up. So this ends up becoming a whole resistant or non-resistant non-believer kind of argument. Well, I'm a non-resistant non-believer. At least I'd like to think that I am for the most part. Um, in the sense that if there were certain things that I saw, I would be inclined to believe that there were a higher power. I might not be inclined to believe in the type of higher power as defined by Darth, but that's, you know, that would be confining myself to local theism or local atheism, whatever, rather than expanding my horizons, so to speak. So this whole thing is just goofy. Like this, he's barking mad.
Isn't that just a psychological descriptor?
Yeah, but that's what Darth asked. Darth asked him, "Are you an atheist?" Haksaw said, "Yes." Good. Why are you an atheist? That's a question that usually just calls for a psychological description of what's going on. He didn't ask him, as usual, Darth's switcheroo. He didn't say, oh, for Darth, he really does believe those are interchangeable. Why are you an atheist equals, tell me how a God is impossible. And then, on top of that, he'll play games with what the definition of the God is. It's easy to say that Darth Dawkins' definition of a God is impossible. You just say, I think that a disembodied mind that is both concrete and non-contingent, which all other things which are contingent derive and depend upon. And this thing has all the quote-unquote great-making properties of omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, etc., is immutable and implacable. I don't think that thing is possible. In fact, I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that thing sounds impossible by definition. Now, if he tries to say, well, wait a minute, what about Superman or something like that? Well, then he's just engaging in a worldview body double. Can't believe how much I run into Calvinistic atheists. I need a new word for you. You need to study Calvinism. P-Town is what you need to do. You need to check with them. So I'll actually put it to you this way, because I used to talk to some pretty decently educated Calvinists. So one simple question to ask to determine whether or not where you're at in the Calvinism thing. Do you believe in free will? P-Town. That's for him. And please tag me in the response so I'll see it. Do you believe in free will?
It's not an
No,
argument.
first of all, they couldn't even defend the statement that there's no evidence for God. Okay, it's really very simple. Okay, I'm going to give you one more chance, Hacksaw. Don't act like a child. Now, categorically, God would be classified metaphysically as the ground of all being.
Okay, but in the thought experiment, it was something that might exist in a possible world where it created people and didn't reveal itself. Now we're getting closer to Darth's actual definition of God. What he says is the only definition of a real God is the metaphysical ground of all being, which is necessarily self-revelatory. It is rationally undeniable. So why did he even bother asking Haksaw that goofy-ass question?
The ultimate source of whatever is, can be, and cannot be. Okay?
Okay, of course. So there is free will. Okay, so you're an Arminian. So Calvinists don't, if you're a good Calvinist, you don't believe in that. All right. You don't choose your salvation. You don't even choose to want it. That has nothing to do with it. If you're a Calvinist, you believe that an irresistible movement of movement, like a bowel movement, an irresistible grace from the Holy Spirit changes your heart against your will, possibly, to come to God. And the reason that that happens is because you're elect. You were destined to be saved, which is the reason why I brought up the part about reprobate. A lot of Calvinists get the part about like it's a deterministic kind of property. We are so depraved in our sin that it isn't about us coming to the realization that God died for us. It's about the Holy Spirit regenerating our hearts so that we may become aware of that. And this becomes an issue in certain theological circles. And Calvinists tend to sometimes they kind of downplay this stuff. But the one aspect that they really downplay is that if you really have a dichotomy there, the person who is elect is someone who is going to be moved and transformed by the Holy Spirit because they are elect, and because of perseverance of the saints, they will not lose their salvation. On the other hand, a reprobate is somebody who cannot be saved. They will not be saved. In the same sense that a saint has been preserved, or an elect has been designated and fated to be, the same is true with the reprobate. So anytime any casual Christians just start flippantly throwing around the word reprobate, I always think it's hilarious, because theologically it carries a certain amount of weight. A lot of weight that I don't think that they realize what they're handling. If you just want to call us sinners, that's easy enough. But then again, all Christians are sinners too. They're just, depending on their, covered by the blood, or, saved through faith alone, or grace, or blah, 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 whatever. But a reprobate, you should be careful of that term. A reprobate is purpose built for damnation. And if you don't believe me, you can go look that up under Calvinist and Reformed theology. Now, if you get into some of the softer, gentler Reformed denominations where they kind of like soften those things, or they move away from those things, well, don't say that I didn't warn you. But I'm talking about, full strength black coffee Calvinism. No sweeteners, no creamer, nothing to make it easier to choke down. It's hardcore. It is determined by the Holy Spirit. It has nothing to do with what you will, what you want, what you choose. It's going to happen because it's what God's plan is. No free will. I'm not Calvinist or Reformed, so who cares? No, well, you should care. You are the one talking about Calvinist atheists, which is cute. But quote unquote, Calvinist atheists, or atheists like me who understand these aspects of Calvinism, they exist because Calvinism is a real thing and represents a decent portion of Protestant Christians out there. So you should know what this is. I know you guys will usually retreat back into this and be like, oh, that's not a big deal. The big deal is whether or not you believe in Jesus or not. And I think Arminians and Catholics and Protestants, or Arminians and the Calvinists and monergists and synergists, they can all agree on this. They can't. They don't. As much as you guys want to hide behind your weird, and you try to present a public face like, oh, no, we're all agreed on the basics that get you saved. There's some inside baseball stuff, but you don't get to find out about that until you actually become part of the group, learn the secret handshake, get the decoder ring. We'll let you pass the curtain, and then we're going to start talking about the stuff that's in parentheses, or the stuff that's in the small print. And that's the stuff where it's Calvinism and Arminianism, which is really a massive deal. It couldn't be bigger. You either choose to believe, which doesn't make sense because that's not how belief works, so Arminians are wrong, or you're deterministically fated into it, which actually makes more sense if you consider the power of the God that you're talking about and the narrative that he's putting out there. Also, the covenantal relationships, the sacrifices, the prophecies, et cetera, et cetera. I think Calvinists have a better leg to stand on. So you should be less flippant about that. I'm not saying that you are trying to put that message out there. That message is out there from other Christians, and you guys are talking in circles.
Now, you reject the notion that the value of the ground of all being constitutes God. Okay? Let's say the ground of all being is X. Are you following me?
Yes.
Okay. So you reject the notion that X has the value of what we call God.
No. What the hell was that?
So for
Let's
you,
back that up a bit.
okay. So you reject the notion that X has the value of what we call God.
No. The metaphysical ground for all being now is equal to X, which is equal to God. That's interesting. Because, and I think Haksaw actually says this, the metaphysical ground for all being could be somebody who just stipulates or asserts that, no, the universe is the ground for all being. The universe writ large, not our instantation, the instantiation of the observable universe within which we currently exist, but the universe that might exist beyond that, whatever this instantiation actually derives and depends upon, the broader universe.
So for you, the ground of all being, the value of X equals whatever constitutes not God for you. Isn't that correct? Mute your microphone, Kava.
So what are you trying to? So you're saying
Sorry,
that anything that
sorry.
Listen
Are you saying that-
carefully. Listen carefully.
Okay.
You reject that the ground of existence, and we got another troll. Hey, welcome to my banhammer.
I reject the
Okay,
existence.
all right, listen carefully. I'm a little bit more educated on this subject matter than you are. You're free to disagree with me, but you need to listen a little bit more because I think you can tell that I know a little bit more about this topic than you do. Now,
And the topic is Darth's interrogation. Yeah, I would expect Darth to be the most aware of his own script. Yeah.
when you reject the existence of God, what you are rejecting is that the ground of all being, which we'll say is X, you reject the notion that the value of X constitutes God.
Yeah, but because that is a non sequitur. The ground of all being, the metaphysical ground of all being, equals X equals God. So if you reject one of them, you're rejecting all of them. That doesn't follow, because somebody's definition of the metaphysical ground for all being wouldn't necessarily have to be God as Darth defines it, and therefore that X variable just means the metaphysical ground for all being. This is more worldview body double stuff. P10, I'll say this. It's really dumb, and I'm vocal about it. No one ever answers when I ask how debating that is applicable to what we are called to do. Well, the problem with how that works out is it does affect how you guys minister to each other and to non-believers. I mean, think about this from the perspective of any Christian. If an Arminian, if you're walking around and the only thing all you have to do, so even within Arminian circles, there's a very big problem with the idea of choosing to believe in God. I could just say that I'm Team Jesus and put a pin in the fact that whether or not I'm convinced he's real or not. But for a lot of Christians, they'd be like, no, that's not enough. You can't say that you're like, hey, I think Jesus is good if he exists. That if he exists, quote, part there, that's a disqualifier. That's not going to get me in. What they're usually trying to say is you need to believe it and you need to be certain about it to some degree. You need to think that it's real and or feel it in your heart or something like that. And for some strange reason, when they're talking about this kind of stuff, they still use the verb choose, as if that the choosing to feel any of those kinds of things about any other thing in your life has ever really gone hand in hand. It just doesn't. As far as Calvinists are concerned, it's very, very simple. Oh, you don't feel it? Then it's probably not you. Or it is you and you'll never feel it, but it doesn't matter. We'll all find out when we're dead. That's the easiest way to know whether or not someone's elect or not. So it's obviously going to affect how you live your life and how you talk about this God that you claim to believe in, because one can lead to some very interesting entailments. You could become a Calvinist who becomes kind of a Christian nihilist. Nothing that you do matters, and so you end up incredibly despondent and neurotic and paranoid about your inevitable death and what's going to happen next. Other people could end up being like, you know what? It doesn't matter ultimately what I do in this particular life, because whether I'm saved or not, it depends on God's irresistible grace. And so they go on doing whatever they want to do, because here's the thing: if they want to do it, it's the way God made them. So it's not that they're rebelling against God. They were either built for destruction and just do those things, or they've got irresistible grace working through them. And so all the good things that they do are just a product of the Holy Spirit working through them. That's just the tip of this. So the idea that, like, hey, you know what we need to do? We need to get out there and get butts in churches and worshiping. The problem with Christianity is like just after you get past the door and the hymns and the passing of the plate is when people start looking at this kind of stuff theologically and are like, wait, what does this mean? Because these are all different ways of reconciling uh, theories about how we're saved and how salvation works and how God works and what the scriptures mean, and et cetera, et cetera. And all that comes with an enormous amount of weight. And if at the end of the day, the only thing that you have to worry about is the destination of your immortal soul, you better believe that people take it very, very seriously and get very weird about it. So to say that it's like, we don't need to consider that, yeah, you absolutely have to. The reason that a lot of Christians, the reason that this Christian, former Christian, me, left Christianity is because Christians failed to deal with this. They leave this up to individuals to deal with. And they act like they have some kind of like unified, they're in some kind of unified group. They're not. That's a lie. Christians are lying to themselves. They're lying to others. They're lying to the world.
So the value of X for you, X being the ground of all being, will constitute whatever it is that you consider to be not God. Isn't that correct?
I don't believe that X has to exist.
Okay, listen to me. Then what you don't, hold on a second. Let me just ban this person now. Okay.
And me.
I just believe that the universe could be eternal as God would be. So if you're trying to
You're
say
not.
there has to be some...
Stop. This isn't a level playing field. You don't know what you're talking about. So listen carefully. If you don't accept that there's a ground of being, then
You don't have to accept that.
nothing exists.
No. How does that follow? I mean, let's see. So it doesn't follow that because I'm not convinced that that God's not real, that God doesn't exist actually. But if I don't think, if I'm not convinced of the notion of a foundational thing, then it follows that nothing else exists either. What the hell is he doing? I don't have to be convinced or right or have any, or I can be agnostic or disagree about this idea of metaphysical foundation, and it has absolutely no bearing with whether or not actual things exist. He's just completely flipped this around on himself, oddly enough.
Or it doesn't mean anything. There's no reason why anything is.
Does it have to mean something?
You're not understanding. Every time you open up your mouth, you are predicating that things possess some semblance of actuality and consequently some intelligibility that derives from its actuality.
I don't know that that's necessarily true if you're only talking in pure fiction. If you've ever read, anything from Lewis Carroll, sorry.
Now, if there is no ground of being, then there is no identifiable, defensible reason as to what or why anything is whatsoever. So there won't be any, hold on a second, there won't be any talking about the sky being blue because there's nothing that dictates blueness or skyness.
That would mean that there's no sky. He keeps doing this. I don't know how many times I have to say this. The entailment is not that you won't be able to talk about the sky. There won't be a you or a sky or talking at all. He keeps screwing this up.
Yes.
Okay? So if you reject the notion that there is a ground of being, Okay.
But that's not where Darth was going. Darth wanted him to, he needed to accept that the ground of being, the metaphysical foundation, equaled X, which equaled God. And now he's just shifted it to, well, now if you reject the ground of being, then you're just rejecting the existence of anything else that comes from it. This is just him playing, again, substituting ground of being, that term, with the God as Darth has implicitly defined it. We know his definition, but he hasn't defined it explicitly in this conversation for Hacksaw, at least not in anything that Tom's got available for us. So I'm assuming it has not come up. Darth is usually pretty shady about this stuff.
Then there's nothing to speak of.
Yes, everything's subjective. I agree with that.
No, you're not understanding. It wouldn't even be subjective. There won't be anything. It never ceases to amaze me how people don't understand this simple concept. There's nothing subjective to be spoken of. Nothing means anything whatsoever. So, Hacksaw, do you believe that anything is real?
I think it's subjective. You can't
Okay.
determinely say something is real or not. You have to
Focus. Do you know how to focus?
I agree with you here, Space Lord. Yeah, I mean, this is just him, just fixated on foundationalism and insisting the only grounds for foundationalism that matches is going to be, the Christian God. Let's see, P-Town, right? I don't know if you were once a true Christian or not. I don't know if you are saved and have just fallen away, or if you never were. Not for me to judge. Again, P-Town, everything that I was just talking about in terms of like the differences between free will and destination, I mean, they play into almost every line you just wrote there. Exactly. What is a true Christian? If I'm a Calvinist, I don't know. Right? It's not up to me. And if I'm an Arminian, it depends on which Arminian philosophers you talk about, which ones they say. You can't. For some people, you can. You can be saved, and then you can step away from the faith, and then you can come back to it. And others are like, absolutely not. That's not how it works. And it all depends on theological notions of grace. And it's not just Calvinists that believe that. The irresistible grace thing is like, part of Calvinism, but other aspects of grace in certain theology, like even in Catholicism, I think they're kind of resistant to the idea that if you're truly saved, you fall away from the faith. I mean, you can be excommunicated and things like that. Being brought back into the fold, I think it can be done with them, but it's tricky. Right now, you're not earning your penthouse in heaven. I know that. Maybe you can come visit me one day. Is that what I need to be doing? Is that why I need to be interested in Jesus? So I'll have a swank ass spread in heaven? So this is a real estate scheme? This sounds like a multi-level marketing gimmick. I mean, dude, is that really what you're about? You need to secure a pimp-ass place after death. I thought the whole point was to be with Jesus. Here's my question, that since you brought that up. P-Town, would you die for God? Would you go to hell if Jesus asked you to? Good luck. Bye, everyone. Have a hell of a day. I'm going to take that as a no.
I didn't ask you. Yeah, focus on what I'm saying to you, not on your pre-prepared scripted responses of your favorite, repertoire. Now, is anything real?
Repertoire. Can I get that spelled out for me, Alex? Like, Trebek. Yeah, I'm gonna need you to sound that one out.
You can label
Repertoire.
things, but
Goodbye. No. You're done. You're okay. You're done.
He's done now. He was done before.
You're an idiot. How difficult if I say, is anything real? And the guy has trouble answering that question.
Right.
If you ask a child this question, if you ask a 6-year-old, is anything real? They're going to look at you and say, of course things are real, stupid. But these 8th.
Okay, so we can ask kids if things are real, and then they know about it. Okay, so because they're capable of saying, like, yeah, the dog's real, the walls are real, the floor is real, my house is real. That's good enough. Okay, therefore God is real. Is that really where Darth's going to go with that? Like, this is, whew. How's it going, Beck? Yeah, exactly. I'll take your word on it if that's how it's spelled. It's a lot of J's though, but I'll use them all if I have to. Repertoire.
Atheist adults have difficulty answering a simple question: is anything real? Now,
Well, it depends on what you mean by real. In a completely subjective world where everything depends on God's good urge and his creation, maybe it's not. Maybe we're all phantasms in his mind.
the point is this. See, this is why it's so difficult talking with so many atheists, because so many of them are shallow thinkers. They're extremely childish thinkers. And those who have higher education and intellect refuse to think in terms of certain philosophical critiques because it will expose the bankruptcy of their position. So that's why they engage in sophism. So I'm going to give you one more chance, Haksaw.
No, you called him an idiot and you said he was done. You said he was done twice, Gary. Come on.
This is not a trick question. It's not a gotcha question. Is anything real?
I'm allowed to say yes or no.
What?
I don't know if he's intentionally doing this, but that's a brilliant way to answer somebody like Darth. I mean, I don't know if he knows them well enough. And yeah, I'm going to have to go with a yes and a no on that one.
Is anything real?
No.
Okay, have a nice day. You're an idiot.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Are you done, Darth? Are you done with him for the third time?
If what you
Okay. All right. This is the colossal level of stupidity that we're dealing with. How do you talk with other human beings who are this purposely stupid?
I don't believe that Darth Dawkins goes out of his way to talk to other human beings in real life. I think this is the closest he can get because this distances himself enough from the human aspect of it where he can, this is the only way that he can engage safely.
Now, do I think he's stupid in his real life? No, I don't. But he's being purposely stupid.
If he's an atheist, it entails that he can't know anything, even though that directly contradicts, the reliability of human sense perception for the existence of the entire species. But Darth is going to try to say, like, do I think he's stupid in the rest of his life? Yeah, it's entailed from a lot of the things that you said, Darth, that you should think that Haksaw is stupid in every other aspect of his life if he can't determine what reality is according to you. This is remarkably weird. Like the one moment where he's going to be charitable and it completely explodes on the fact that everything entailed from what he spent like 10 minutes berating this guy with. It doesn't hold up. Like, no, it does hold in Darth's mind that if you don't agree with him, you are, by definition, stupid.
It's a little game that they want to play. They don't want to grant you anything. So they just play the contrarian game.
Well, even if you grant him something, he gets weird about it. Because like if you grant him like, oh yeah, and also unfair because Haksaw did grant him. In a possible world where a god might exist that creates some people but doesn't reveal himself, is that possible? Haksaw said yes. He granted him that. And then Darth's like, aha, gotcha, bitch. Thought experiment over. What that entails is that you think that a god is actually possible. Like, no. The hypothetical that you presented, I think that that's a possibility. Actually, didn't even have to try to go through all the weird rambling that I did, saying like, no, Darth doesn't actually believe that. No, that's not Darth's definition of a god. I think Darth's engaging in worldview body doubles, blah, 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 blah. That's just me having Darth derangement syndrome and talking about this repetitively.
They're like little kids playing Monopoly. They'll cheat at every opportunity they can.
A few moments later.
Haksaw, does it logically and necessarily follow
Poor guy.
because you're unconvinced, therefore God does not exist?
Wait, I wasn't listening. What did you say?
That's actually good. Don't listen to Darth. Darth doesn't believe in atheists, which is why everyone can reason. They reason in light of Darth's dishonest belief that everyone believes in God. He knows it's a troll. Yeah. Darth.
Yeah. Does it logically and necessarily follow because you have a psychological state wherein you're unconvinced of God's existence, Therefore, God does not and cannot exist.
I would say that he doesn't necessarily exist, but I'm not.
Okay, Haksaw, focus on the question. This is one of the biggest problems I have with unbelievers.
It's the biggest problem unbelievers have with Darth Dawkins, is asking this dumb question. Because the only reason he gets there, like, are you trying to tell me that because you aren't convinced that God's real, that means necessarily he doesn't exist? No. Remember, we started this conversation with you asking me why I was an atheist, not why God is impossible. If he'd been honest and asked that question first, this wouldn't have gone this way. But I think at this point, like, Darth developed some of these questions in this script early on in the debate community because people were a lot more vicious. And in the Discord community, a lot of these Discord exchanges I've seen lately, it doesn't seem like there's that many people. I mean, there's probably some out there. But Darth is still like operating like it's like 8 years ago when everybody was like jumping on him for every wrong word that he got. And now he's got the mods and stuff in most of the channels that he's in. So he's just kicking people out of here. And some of these people, Hacksaw doesn't sound like he's totally really familiar with Darth's shtick. But Darth is still acting like he's like geared up to like really go, and he's got to play a lot of things close to the vest. He's not gonna give up. He's complaining that, well, these damn unbelievers, they won't concede anything. They won't even take it, like, concede anything, or just for the sake of argument. It used to be, if not that long ago, that when someone used the term for the sake of argument, Darth would fly into a foaming rampage. You could hear him start to stress test his microphone. So, Darth is kind of mutated into a caricature of himself at this point.
They either purposely or inadvertently aren't focusing. Now, does it logically and necessarily follow that because you are unconvinced, therefore God doesn't exist?
No.
Okay,
Perfect.
so you've now falsified your own position.
How? What was his position? His original position was that he doesn't believe in God. And he gave his psychological, or at least he gave a reason for that psychological condition. His position is not that God is impossible. His position was he's not convinced that there is a God. And he answered the question. Now Darth's trying to say that he falsified his original position, and it's not his position. It's what Darth wants his position to be. He wants Hacksaw's position to be, God's impossible, therefore I don't believe in him. And that's not what Hacksaw's put out there.
What is my position?
Your position was God doesn't exist because you're unconvinced.
That was not my position. I mean, I was asking,
okay. So God does. Okay, so God does. Well, could have fooled me. So God doesn't exist because.
Yeah, and now he gets into this. This is just a weird way of saying, so God's impossible. Why is God impossible? And if you're a smart person, if you really want to suss this out, you'd have to ask him, well, by God, what do you mean? What particular what properties of God are we talking about? What kind of arguments are we talking about for this particular God? Are we talking about the ontological thing? We're talking about, the modal ontological type of God. Are we talking about some Anselmian ontological argument for God? Which version? Is it the God of classical theism? Is it the disembodied mind that has all the great making properties? We know that Darth holds to that one, but even then he shifts and moves things around. And then, to me, again, I would say that that's an easy question. Like, God does not exist because the God of classical theism is impossible due to its properties.
There's plenty of evidence that directly contradicts everything.
Yeah.
God.
Don't you love it, folks? Don't you love it, folks? How we just get this vague generalization? What's that?
Okay, so if you want to critique specifically, there's thousands of contradictions within the Bible. There's
Stop. This is more.
It's just a weird way to say that word. I can't emphasize that enough. Stop. It's like, can you imagine if that was your alarm? Whatever device it was coming out of, you'd break.
Or childish reasoning. You're
By the way, hi Bree, good to see you. Welcome to the
baiting and switching from global atheism to local atheism. Atheism is there are no gods.
Okay, I'll stay broad. I'll stay broad.
So tell me why God doesn't exist.
I wouldn't say from a global
Okay, so wait. So he wants no local atheism. They want global atheism. Why doesn't God exist? Don't you mean gods? I don't understand what he's doing here. Or like, oh, well, no, I want you to actually disprove any definition of any god anyone has ever had. Darth is already kind of like Haksaw wouldn't probably know this. I don't know how much he's heard, but that wouldn't matter because any other definition is not God. There's only one definition fitting of God: disembodied mind, creator of all things, foundational basis for all things. That the source of impossibility, and possessor of all great making properties. It's a great big space brain with lots of talents.
perspective, from like whatever you say, I would say I'd be more closer to agnostic to it. I don't think there's any
Okay,
way
well,
for
I got
scripture
bad
to
news.
back it
I
up.
got bad news for you. An agnostic is somebody who falsely claims they're suspending judgment, but you're denying God implicitly and indirectly. You are affirming one or more propositions that exist without referencing the necessity of God, which constitutes that God can't logically coexist. Agnostics are just simply closet atheists or atheists who have fooled themselves that they're not denying God.
As an agnostic,
Nope, that's not true. Really, I think everybody's an agnostic atheist. You don't know, and you're not convinced, or you're denying it, and usually a combination of both. I don't know if there is a God or isn't a God. I can't prove one does exist or doesn't exist conclusively. So, to that sense, I'm agnostic. Because if we're talking about if God equals the metaphysical foundation of all of reality, no, I don't think that there's an ultimate being. There really isn't a way for me to ever be capable of understanding that. So I'd have to say, yeah, I'm agnostic on that. The atheism part, where I deny its existence, would come from the fact that, like, yeah, I don't know if that thing is real or not. I'm not convinced that it is. There's the atheist. But again, this is not really sort of a label for your kind of psychological position on the situation. Agnostic in the sense that you can't really prove it one way or the other. Atheist to the point where you're not convinced and you're prepared to say that it's probably not the case that there is a God or gods. Now, if you got to jump into the philosophical debate, then you got to take a position. God exists or God does not exist. Yes or no. Trying to use the agnostic position there really didn't get you anywhere. It's not really informative. So, but Darth gets a little too he gets his underwear in a twist over this way too often.
I
Now,
would say
I'm gonna explain this very simply and clearly. There's no debate over this, okay? You will either invoke facts with reference to the necessity of God, or you will invoke facts without.
It doesn't matter. This is that classic, like, you need to assume the truth of God as the foundation of knowledge. Okay? And then he'll try to say, well, wait, why would I need to do that? Because God's the only reason why anything is. Okay. So God made all the stuff, including me. The only way I can know and or state things about the things I think that I know is by assuming that that fact is true. That is categorically different than just asserting that God is the foundation for all things that exist. Now, you can say that God is the foundation for knowledge, but that's not where he's going. If you're going to predicate a fact based on one thing or the other, he seems to think that if you this is classic Darth, you either predicate a fact based on this starting point or not. And unless it's this way, then for some reason I don't know, it ceases to be a fact. The one thing that's interesting about this is that he's never actually explained to anybody. If you have two individuals, an atheist and a Christian, and they look at a situation in the actual world and they both predicate the same fact, they both say the same thing. Uh, that dog is a German Shepherd. They both agree, right? Does Darth actually believe that one is right and one is wrong? The purpose, I thought, of precept was to be like, no, the reason that they're both right is because God is what makes this whole thing possible. But then again, that's just the ontological part of it. God made everything possible. He made you, he made me, he made the German Shepherd in the yard, the one the atheist and the Christian are both talking about. But presuppers are constantly on this weird little trick, like, no, you need to assume the truth of Christianity, or you need to assume the truth of my God, because that's necessary as a foundation for knowing things and saying and talking about the things that you know. They cannot provide any demonstration for why this is necessary. And when you ask them for why it's necessary, all they talk about is that God is necessary for the existence of stuff. But they don't talk about God being why this assumption on your part is necessary to establish knowledge. It makes no sense. And, as I've said before many times, it defies the whole notion of the noetic effects of sin. The whole reason I can be blinkered into thinking that, according to Darth's worldview, that I am not convinced that there's a God is from sin. It's not just pure reason. Darth seems to be operating on this world where he can actually come at people like, and I've mentioned this before. He doesn't have the understanding to know that he doesn't actually think about this stuff in terms of like the spiritual realm. Most Christians would assume this, at certain points, like your job as a Christian is to put the word out there, the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ out there. And to those that will accept it, they do. That's based on the Holy Spirit or whatever. And you can debate that. And those that reject it, well, maybe they'll pay the price or whatever. But this is entirely up to God. Whether or not a person's heart is really changed, in the end, it's about God giving you that. And even Arminians will say this. They will be grateful for the fact that they made the right choice and maybe be grateful to God for, oh, thank you, for making me smart enough or sensitive enough or spiritual enough to heed the call or whatever. Tricky, but I've heard them do it. Now, with that being said, well, never mind. Let's just push forward.
Every agnostic, just like atheists do, invoke facts without referencing the necessity of God. That is an informal and an indirect denial of God. You're still denying God.
No. Not assuming the truth of God as a foundation, necessary foundation for knowledge, is not the denial of a God as the creator of all things. Those are not the same thing. So Darth's just wrong there.
It doesn't matter whether you deny it. It doesn't matter whether you don't even understand your mistake. You're still denying God. Now, the fact of the matter is that
he isn't denying God.
You will deny God either directly or indirectly.
No, not necessarily.
Makes no difference. So
it makes a massive difference. One is epistemological and one is ontological. Well, in a way, that's kind of a stretch, but this is weird.
Explain to me why God doesn't exist. Because when I explain to you...
There it is. There's the question. Explain to me why God doesn't exist. That's a little closer to being honest. The question he's supposed to be asking is, why is God impossible? Why do you think God's impossible? I don't understand, like, maybe he's not listening to me. Maybe he's not watching any of my shows, because it seems to me, if he asks somebody, any of these guys, like, why is God impossible? And they say, well, he's not. Then he's got them. Because if he sticks to his definition of God, and he's like, hey, you know my definition of God, right? Sure. Why is it impossible? And if they say, well, maybe it's not. Well, then he has room to move. Tons of room. And he can't, but he won't be able to complain about them not conceding anything, because they've conceded an enormous amount.
How God doesn't exist, I'm going to have your mouth shut. You're not going to be able to give me an atheistic response. So tell me why God doesn't exist.
So God doesn't exist because the universe could just have been as eternal as God. There's no need for
Okay,
God to
okay,
exist.
all right. This is childish.
Yeah, that's not a great answer to that. I mean, just because it could be something else doesn't mean. I mean, I know where he's going with that, but just because it could be something else doesn't mean that would make it. That got. You could have both, but they haven't gotten that far in the conversation, or at least there hasn't been enough of an exchange to really make that work. You could have I mean, if somebody presented it. Well, actually, no. The point I was going to bring up, I think Darth brings up himself. Let's keep
Reasoning. Okay. God doesn't exist because you're invoking a figment of your imagination? Is what you just said a figment of your imagination?
So, because he brought up the idea that a possible foundation for the ground of all being could be the universe, that is a figment of his imagination. Versus what Darth is asserting is the actual state of affairs, a disembodied mind with all great making properties, upon which all things derive and depend. All of reality derives and depends. Okay. But if this guy says the universe, it's a figment of his imagination, as opposed to being informed by the fact that he lives within a universe and so has some concept of, oh, what do I call it? Possibly. I'm kind of putting words in his mouth here, potentially. But I would like to think that Hacksaw, like most of us, if you've been exposed to any kind of documentaries about science or anything, you have some idea, especially about space, quantum physics, the galaxy. Hell, and watch any of the documentary, either version of Cosmos. You have some idea of the size, grandeur, just sheer, massive, awe-inspiring concept of what our instantiated universe is, and the notion that that could just be an instantiation of a universe in a moment. There could be much more to it beyond that. So and that follows from the fact that based on what we've been able to see, what we've been able to discover just within the reality that we're in. So no, that's not a figment of his imagination. That's grounded in his actual experience in the universe, in reality. And Darth is just trying to say, like, no, no, no. If you're positing that, you're exchanging my God, which I'm insisting is real, for a figment of your imagination. So, okay, so the universe equals pixies, equals Bigfoot, equals. My brother likes to use how do you know there isn't a unicorn in my backyard that craps gold bricks or something like that? Those would be those are closer to figments of one's imagination, but this kid's insists like, wait a minute, let's hold on to the possibility that maybe the ground of all being is just the universe. It's some instantiation, figment of your imagination. I prefer to think of it as the great big floating brain.
As much as God is.
No, listen carefully. Is what you just said a figment of your imagination?
You're a figment
Yes.
of my imagination.
Okay.
I kind of wish Hacksaw would give him some of that,
So you're saying God doesn't exist because you invoked a figment of your imagination?
God doesn't exist because you're a doo-doo head.
Do you realize how
Yeah.
stupid that is?
Well, when you put it your way, Darth, yeah, it's dumb.
It's the same argument people make for God all the time.
No,
Hacksaw's right.
no, sir. No,
if you can
that's
imagine
not
him,
the
he
same
must
argument.
exist.
No, I
Actually, the only thing that I would push back on with Hacksaw is that it's not. Like I said before, Hacksaw can actually, at least appeal to the fact that, like, man, have you ever watched anything about about space, about our what we photograph, what we've observed in deep space? So, I mean, conceptually and actually, it's massive, and there's so much more to find out and discover. It's for the limits of our imagination, that's practically limitless. So he actually has some kind of grounding there to say, well, wait a minute, why isn't that enough? Because what's there is an awful lot. And Darth's going to be one of these guys that's like, no, it's not. 6,000 years, because he's a young Earth creationist. That's nothing. And I would agree. Compared to what we actually know about the age of our, universe.
you know what? I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who says that as a Christian. Now, the bottom line here is this. Explain to me why God doesn't exist, because so far what you've said, it does not logically and necessarily follow. Okay?
I really do actually kind of agree with you, Bite Me. At this point, they're like, you need to tell me why it can't exist. No, dude, you need to tell me why it does. Because the goal that at this point, you really don't have to tolerate any of this goal shifting. You need to explain to me why this is, other than just asserting that it must be this way. Because Hacksaw could just be, he'd dig his heels in and say the exact same thing. No, dude. You have to accept that the universe is the foundation and ground of all being. And until you accept that, you can't predicate facts. I don't have to accept any damn thing that you say because you don't understand the assumption of the truth of the ground of all being the universe is necessary as a foundation for knowledge. You need to do that. And then you need to tell me why it's not enough. You need to explain to me why it's not enough. And then Darth will go on and try to, well, there's a universe, do this, and what about time and infinite? And he'll just try to get into cosmos. I'm like, no, 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 no. No, that's not the limit of what it is. We don't understand it all. There's a lot more to it than that. Those are theories, et cetera, et cetera. You can just blow past that and just be like, you haven't actually described to me or explained to me why it's impossible for the universe. Not necessarily this is instantiated reality, but the universe, including all the stuff about it that we don't know, is not in fact the metaphysical ground of all reality. And until you can do that, I don't have to talk to you anymore. You're just an idiot. You're just one of these people insisting on your figment, your imaginary figment here. You're just inserting God in there because you can't accept the scope of the universe being responsible for all of this. You need it to be a disembodied mind that loves you. Anyone can push back. You can insert literally anything in there and run this exact same game. And then try to tell him, like, why is that impossible? Why is it impossible for the universe to be that? And then make him try to come up with those answers. At this point, though, when he's trying to, why isn't God possible? Why is God impossible? What's going on? You explain to me why it's an impossibility that my God exists. He hasn't even determined with Hacksaw if they have a shared definition of what gods are. He's gotten after him over the local and global differences, but that's not going to do him any good. Because after he did that, like, no, we need to keep it general. And then, okay, now explain why God doesn't exist. Well, if we're really talking about global atheism, you probably want my explanation for why gods plural don't exist, right? The God that Darth defines, I think, is easy enough to actually define as being impossible. If you wanted to define God as simply superhuman people or something like ancient aliens, kryptonites, whatever, Kryptonians, excuse me, not kryptonites, Kryptonians, something in that category, I don't know if I could rule that out. I mean, there's plenty of other reasons why you could infer from our reality that that's probably not likely. But can you conclusively prove that one, those things never existed, don't exist somewhere, and aren't gods? I don't know. But it depends on your definition of God.
God does not exist because?
Is there a possibility that God does not exist?
Listen to me, sir. You see, this is what all of you atheists do. You have minds of like children.
And this is everything that Darth Dawkins does. Everything that he does. The entire point, and all the blood pressure rising that's happened here is on his side of things. He's ticked off because, like, I just don't understand why you can't follow the conversation. Well, you should have asked this question 15 minutes ago. But you also should have asked, like, why is God impossible? And then maybe get some better answers from people.
You can't answer the straightforward question. You told me that you said that there's an alternative explanation. Is that alternative explanation necessarily true?
Yeah, just as necessarily true as God is.
Okay. I'm not going to continue the conversation because you're colossally stupid.
Okay, what's having said that's stupid?
You listen. You tell me you're 22 years old?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're reasoning with me like a 15-year-old.
Well, what have I said that's stupid?
He upgraded him. He upgraded him from 14 to 15.
Could you?
Good job.
What you just said?
Well,
Don't you recall what you just said?
What's the fallacy?
You keep on characterizing the theistic position. That's a caricature. That's a straw man.
How is a straw man? Could you please explain it?
What you're saying is
He's really stuttering a lot, talking to somebody that he believes to be. I don't get this. I'm not. Is he on different meds or something? I mean,
Well, my atheism is a figment of imagination, but so is your theism. Nana nana boo boo.
Anyways,
that wasn't his position. Again, that was Darth projecting into what Hacksaw's position was.
That's a childish response.
That would be a childish response, but Hacksaw didn't give that response. Darth thought he did. A lot of this conversation really is happening inside Darth's own mind.
On what grounds do you say our invocation and or the defense of God is false? On what grounds? The only grounds you have to give is you.
I don't know who this person is, the horse from Horsing Around, but this is. I like that avatar, and Darth is just going, and like I'm wondering when he's going to snap.
You have to give an atheist critique, an atheist defense. The ground of all being, as far as you're the ground of all being, as far as you're concerned, is not God. What is the ground of all being that is the negator for God being the ground of all being?
The universe.
Okay, but wait a minute. Just a few minutes ago, you said there was no ground of all being.
I thought he said there might not be, or that he didn't have to accept it.
Well, hold on. Also,
Hacksaw, I'd say it for him. He didn't have to accept that there is a ground for all being. But if somebody's going to insist on something foundational, something in foundationalism, you could just say, well, it's the universe.
No, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Listen to me carefully. A few minutes ago, you told me you didn't know, or you said there doesn't have to be a ground of all being. Do you remember you saying that?
What did you define the ground of all being as?
Goodbye. Goodbye. Okay, you're done. You're done. You're
the fourth time.
Please, sorry.
We're
also
we're done.
Darth, he said.
Wait a minute. You know what? This country is doomed. 22-year-olds with the minds of 14-year-olds. Here's a guy who said, "Oh, I don't accept that there's a ground of all being. There doesn't need to be a ground of all being."
He might be right about that, Darth.
Now he says there is a necessary ground of all being, the universe.
No, you asked him if there was a defeater for God being the ground for all being, and he said the universe could be it. That's not him committing to the universe being the grounding of all being, or even him committing to the belief that that's the case. Man, Darth's stupid.
He just flatly contradicted himself.
No, he didn't, you idiot. You just can't keep track of the layers of horse shit you're shoveling out.
What he said earlier. And we're to take these people seriously, that they've solved.
I don't think that Darth is smart enough to really take any. I don't think he should be taking anything seriously. I think this is an actual problem for him. I think this is the reason why that so many people are fascinated with him, because he's not smart enough to really be able to figure out a lot of this stuff, but he's just smart enough to get into the weeds of some of this crap to really get good and solidly messed up over it.
The single most important question of human existence about God, the existence of God, and the guy flatly contradicts himself.
Things are only impressive if they're someone's achievement? Okay, why? That doesn't make sense.
So he does think that the universe is real.
Is it objectively true that the universe is the ground of all being?
He's got him back again? What?
Haksaw.
Could you define the ground of all being for me?
You know what? Goodbye. You're an idiot. Now
to be fair, it is too late for that.
I'm kicking you out. Now I'm kicking you out of the room.
What did you define it? Please, sorry.
I did. Okay.
You defined it as X, which is the creation of the universe, right? You defined
the necessary precondition for all being.
Wait a minute. 22 years old, and he has the mind of a 14-year-old. Do you know what it is when you ask them a question and they don't want to answer it? So they just play little obfuscation games.
The obfuscation games. Right, the obfuscation games of accusing people of swapping out God for of all things, a figment of their imagination. He'd say that stuff all the time to Skylar Fiction, because Skylar would try to say something like, well, I'm not an atheist, I'm a deist. And that's when it was always kind of funny, because for somebody who credits himself. I'll give Darth Dawkins credit about this because he's like, I know the atheist cliches. In some sense, he's right. Because when somebody comes at him who's a deist, and really deists don't come at anyone, but you know what I mean. And they're just like, the universe is it, or something like that. They're usually pretty like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, whatever. They're not hard charging. Darth will be, then all of a sudden, Darth shifts into hardcore skeptic. How do you know that? 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 Oh yeah. It's the strangest thing. For him, he's completely internalized the presuppositional idea that he just insists that, well, there has to be a thing that made everything, and the thing that made everything has to be a personality. This Danon guy in the chat is doing the same thing. Well, why would you be impressed with something if it didn't come from someone? Well, I don't know. It depends on what we're talking about, I guess. I can be impressed by, say, fungal growth. That's impressive. That wasn't achieved by something. I mean, it was a living organism, sure, but um, if you start talking about what they can do, it's a little weird. Not only what they can do, but what they are. Being impressed by bees, for instance, like the size. I'm like, oh, but that's a someone. That's a personality. Is it? Hive mind creatures? I don't know. I mean, they're deserving of respect. They're little animals, and they're very productive. Um, but yeah, this is, to me, the fixation on the fact that, like, it doesn't mean anything unless a person made it specific and made it for me. Just seems like an anthropomorphication to the point of complete self-involvement. Like, it has to be the result of some other being's creativity and engineering, and they did it for me. That's a little weird. Or if they're lying, and a lot of Christians do lie, they did it, well, God did it for himself. He did it for his own glory. And that's paramount to God. Everything is done for his own glory. And then you have to wonder, like, why would that be an important thing to an immutable, unchanging, perfect being? I shouldn't have said immutable and unchanging, it's the same thing. Yeah, the stuff always gets weird. So there you have it. Darth Dawkins talking with Haksaw, not well. Really kind of messing stuff up there. Lord. Yeah, he's not doing good. And within a 20-minute conversation, give or take, he managed to mute and kick that guy, I think, 4 or 5 times to bring him back in, and not really make any progress at all in any meaningful way. But of course, the lack of progress and his frustration, it's all the atheist's fault. It has nothing to do with, him driving himself crazier. So, Leonardo says, I'm impressed by tomato hornworms. Those are weird. I've seen those. But yeah. We are anthropomorphic creatures. We can't escape our own minds. Well, unless you talk to certain Christians, and then we should doubt our own minds, despite the fact that we can't escape them, right? Yeah, well, with that, folks, I think I'm going to wrap this one up just under 90 minutes. So thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm going to be back probably tomorrow. I've got a few days off thanks to the extended weekend. Bree says, Darth is the mud fossil University of Philosophical Discourse. Yeah. Yeah, he's the gift that keeps on giving. So there's a few other things I'm probably going to cover, and I'm hoping to cover them probably over the weekend. But yeah, wanted to get some Darth coverage in. So that was this one. This one wasn't that great, to be honest. Kind of, a typical, him kind of punching down on somebody that I think, and I don't mean punching down on the fact that I think Haksaw is like lacking in any way, but it just seems like more and more of these conversations that Darth has on discourse, he's aiming them at these kinds of people to set them up as foils, like, and the fact that after years of doing this, he's acted consistently surprised at, quote unquote, the stupidity. Like, this is just classic example, and I know I've repeated this, but I'm going to again. If you meet one asshole, you can tell everybody, hey, can you believe this asshole I met today? But if you meet assholes all day long, yeah, there's a common denominator, and that common denominator is Daddy Gasbag, Darth Dawkins. So, all right, with that, I am going to get out of here. I am going to remove that, and we're going to shut this down. So thank you, everybody, again, for showing up. Thank you, everybody, in the live stream for being, cool, and your comments and everything. Apologies to P-Town. He ran away because I was asking him tough theological questions. I don't know if that's the case, but I'd like to think it is. But you got any questions, comments, like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff if you're interested. If not, don't worry about it. I will be back as soon as I can with some other content. But yeah, that'll do it. Have a great night. Have a good weekend. Take care of yourselves, and I will catch you all next time. Later.